Yeah.
So for all of you board members and a few additional people who want to talk about birds tonight, hello and welcome. And I am going to turn things over to Andy and Becky, who are hosting this evening's chat. And feel free to let us know if you have any questions. I am going to mute microphones to start with, except for Andy and Becky, just because the camera will switch to wherever there's sound. But if you do have a question, please do feel free to unmute and ask a question as you go along tonight. Tonight we present just an informal chat with two of our DOAS co-presidents, Andy Mason and Becky Gretton. So hello and thank you for your time tonight.
Good. Thanks, Susan, and thanks for arranging these virtual chats and all the other gatherings we've had since back in March. It's pretty amazing technology, and while it's not as good as the face-to-face, it's a pretty decent substitute. So I thought what I would do was to start off was, which I often do when I give bird talks, and actually Charlie and Sandy did this also last time we did one of these, was to talk a little bit about the bird calendar. You know, birds have calendar just as we do, and for them perhaps it's even more significant, the change of the months, the change of the seasons. And so here we're now getting towards mid-August, and we're at the tail end of the breeding season, which really is quite an extended period for birds in our area. It really starts as early as January or February, when great horned owls and even bald eagles start nesting preparation. And then it extends into this month, I think even occasionally into September. But it's kind of, if you looked at it, would sort of be a bell curve, and the peak would be, peak of activity would be in late May through June and early July. So now things are tapering down. Most of the birds, especially the tropical migrants, the birds that we think of as just coming north for the summer and heading south for the winter, those birds are pretty well done. They need to complete their nesting cycle. They need to get the young birds independent and on their own early enough that they can grow, build up enough strength to make the migratory journey back south, sometimes as far as Brazil or Argentina for some of these birds. So they have been, you know, very, very hard at work, very busy, occupied, nesting, raising young, and fledging them and getting them independent. So that's where the big majority of birds are at the moment. The local birds, the birds that either are shorter distance migrants or that stay here year round, for them it's not so critical. They can nest a little bit later, and in fact, one of the last birds to nest, to complete nesting, is a goldfinch, and that's a common species. I think most people know it from bird feeders. Susan, can you put up that slide of a goldfinch? There we go. Excellent. Yeah, this is a bird I think everybody knows. It changes its plumage dramatically from winter to summer. This is a male in full breeding plumage. In the winter, they're more of a dull, sort of a greenish yellow bird, and really quite often people mistake them for something else. They look so different than they do in the summer. But the goldfinches wait till very late in the summer to nest. They like to use thistle down in their nest to line their nest, and even milkweed down, which comes very late. And they also rely on thistle seed, which they also use at bird feeders, a different type of thistle, but they feed a lot on thistles. And so late summer is a good time for them to nest, to take advantage of that. And so they are still nesting. You'll see the males doing a rather pronounced breeding flight, which sort of looks like them on a roller coaster singing as they fly. And so goldfinches, when they start displaying their breeding behavior, then we know it's things are coming to an end in that regard. So they're wonderful birds, and they're active right now, and they're pretty well the last bird to nest regularly in our area. So that's kind of where the birds are at. And then the next step, which actually again has already started to some degree, is the southbound migration. And the earliest birds to go are actually some of the shorebirds that don't nest here, that nest further north, up in the tundra and above the Arctic Circle even sometimes. And they arrive early. They have a very compressed breeding cycle up there, and then they head south. And sometimes they'll even be going south in July. So places where shorebirds congregate, we don't have any good locations for that around here, but places like Montezuma National Wildlife Refuge and Jamaica Bay Wildlife Refuge down on Long Island, where there are a lot of mud flats and good feeding areas for shorebirds. This is prime time for seeing shorebirds gathering up in big flocks and stopping at those areas to fuel up for continuing south. So that's just a little overview of where we are in the bird calendar. Does anybody have any questions, or has anybody seen any good sightings, anything unusual at their feeders this recently? Hummingbirds get a lot of attention this time of year because people do see them at their feeders, and they get kind of concerned that they may be staying too late once the weather starts getting cold. So we often get questions about hummingbirds, what happens to them at this time of year and as we go into the fall. Does anybody still have hummingbirds at their feeder?
Oh, I do. I actually have a lot. I'm going through 24 ounces of hummingbird nectar every day. So there's between 5 and 12 at any one time, coming and going and coming and going between. I have 2 feeders, so that's pretty neat. I wanted to also ask you a question though, about, well, at least make a point that I have some bluebirds nesting in a box. This pair have been really good parents, and they produce 4 great chicks. And I thought they were just roosting in the box for a while, but I found out yesterday they are carrying food again. So I believe there's another set of babies in there soon to hatch out. So I guess this is the first I've ever seen this here. So they are, I guess, a little late. I don't know. Have you seen this before?
Well, bluebirds will nest twice in a season and sometimes 3 times.
Wow.
So I suspect that this is certainly a second brood and maybe a third. Another thing that happens with birds is if they lose one brood, if something happens, predation or cold weather or something, they are prone to start again if they judge that there's still time to get the young birds ready. So probably, I would say, I know you have very good habitat where you are, and I would think you might be seeing a third nesting there.
Well, I've been really paying attention to them too, and the babies, the first set of babies, are not really visible anymore. They must be around. Would they just take off on their own?
Well, they probably have dispersed. You know, they're probably not too far away. I doubt they've traveled too far. But once, you know, once the parents quit feeding them, you know, they'll stay with the parents as long as the parents tolerate them. But then they are kind of on their own, and they'll have to you know, go out and find their own food. So yeah, they're probably not too far away, but they may not be right around your yard like they were. You know, and that's probably a good thing, because you know, if the parents are having another brood, they're going to need the food in the neighborhood for them. So
so they don't necessarily just stay together as a family unit during the whole migration too?
Well, not necessarily, no. Although bluebirds do flock up in the fall, you know, you will see, sort of like robins do and like other species do, you will see gatherings of bluebirds. And in fact, they're known for, on cold nights in the fall and early winter, they will all come together, perhaps as many as 12 or 15, and all go in a bluebird box together and spend the night in there for warmth, roosting overnight. In fact, there's special boxes that are designed to let bluebirds get in and out of the cold and spend the night. So I would suspect in those situations, I'm sure they're not all related. There's probably a mixed flock of adults and fledglings, but they're very well maybe the young along with the parents, but not necessarily one defined family.
And we do see groups of bluebirds go over the Franklin Mountain Hawk Watch too in the fall.
Yeah, they you know, you'll see, if you keep your eyes open, you will definitely see these birds gathering into flocks prior to migration. The robins definitely, blackbirds can get into huge flocks, you know, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of birds in some cases. Swallows, tree swallows are known for huge flocks before they migrate, and as they're moving south, they stay together. So yeah, that's quite a phenomenon to see that, and it's happens probably mostly in September and October when these birds are. That's the peak of migration. So yeah, here's a nice bluebird shot, and these photos, I think they're labeled, the ones that are by Rick Bunting, who's a great local photographer. And if you're not on Rick Bunting's mailing list, you might want to consider doing so. Every morning he sends out 3 or 4 wonderful photos, a variety of subjects, very often birds. Right now he seems to be into butterflies, but this is typical of the quality of his shots, and it's a great way to start the day.
Yep. I'll cut in here just very quickly. If you follow the DOAS Facebook page, we often will repost and share some of his messages from the day with some of his photos. So you've probably seen some of them on our page, with thanks to Catherine.
Yeah, bluebirds are very special birds. You know, the state bird of New York. And they are a species that never became endangered, to that officially endangered, but they were in steep decline due to competition from other cavity nesting birds, primarily starlings and house sparrows, which are non-native and that were introduced here from England. And they outcompeted the bluebirds for nesting sites, and so bluebird numbers went way down. But people discovered that if you put up a properly designed and built bluebird house, especially the hole size there, it will keep starlings out. And if it's put up in a good location, house sparrows will stay away. Bluebirds, you can see it would be a tight squeeze even for this bluebird to get in there, but they can. And so that has brought bluebirds back considerably. They're not as at risk as they used to be. So we always encourage folks to put up bluebird boxes if they have some open land around their home. We did have a question from Charlie asking when goldfinch fledglings could be expected. And that's kind of right now, this is kind of an important question because there is a survey going on, a statewide survey, 5-year project, the Breeding Bird Atlas, which is intended to determine where different species are nesting throughout the state. And one of the ways to determine that is to identify fledglings of a species. So if you see young birds recently out of the nest, goldfinches, for example, then you know that they have nested in that area, and you can record that as part of this project. So so now, you know, people who are working on the atlas are on the lookout for goldfinch fledglings. I would think they could be appearing now, and I would think all the way through the rest of August and even into September. It's hard to say. Individual birds, they don't all nest at the same time, but I would think it's possible there are goldfinches that nested early enough that they would have fledglings now. So yeah, this is a good time to be keeping an eye out for them.
Andy, speaking of boxes, I was in New Hampshire a couple weeks ago, and I saw in swampy areas boxes which I assumed were wood duck boxes, but they had an extension, like a square, like almost like a tube going out from the box. And I couldn't figure out, I mean, it was hard to imagine wood ducks being able to get in that, but any idea what that setup is for?
I suspect that was to try to exclude raccoons. Raccoons get into, you know, they climb up wood duck boxes and they can get in the hole or reach in the hole and get the eggs or get the young birds. And so there are various techniques for thwarting them. Very often you'll see aluminum metal around the pole that the box is mounted on, which is to give make it difficult for a raccoon to climb up the post. Sometimes it'll be a cone-shaped thing around the pole, sort of like you put on a bird feeder, a baffle. So I think that's probably what that is. It's to keep a raccoon from reaching in there. That's why this bluebird box picture, by the way, that extra block that the bird is holding onto, that's the purpose for that also. That's because raccoons will reach into bluebird boxes and get the birds and the eggs. And so that extra thickness on the front makes it a little tougher for the raccoons to get in there. So that's I think the purpose of that. Yeah, it's pretty amazing to see wood ducks go in their boxes, because they fly in at like top speed, and it always looks like they're going to smash and come out the back of the box to me. Somehow they manage to fly in very fast and put on their brakes at the last minute and not hurt themselves. But it's quite a sight, actually. So I imagine that little extension that some boxes have, maybe it helps them decelerate some. So, but yeah, that's you know, there are a number of species that will use boxes. Not all birds nest inside in cavities, but a lot do, and those that do can be helped by properly designed boxes. You know, bluebirds, kestrels, which are a small falcon, are in decline, and putting up nest boxes for them has helped. The wood duck boxes have definitely helped the wood duck population, and so yeah, that's a good thing.
Andy or Becky, we have a question from Tracy back to hummingbirds to find out when hummingbirds leave the area. She has 1 or 2 and doesn't want to make too much nectar if they leave soon.
Becky, what's your experience with bluebirds or with hummingbirds departing?
I feel like by September 1st, maybe early September, even into September a little bit. You know, I don't put a lot in the feeder. I just put a little bit and refresh it frequently. So I'm not wasting it, because the birds are infrequent, but they're still around. What do you think, Andy?
Yeah, I think that's probably about when they would start to leave. You know, again, birds are individuals, and sometimes they linger, you know, well into September, even October. And again, people get worried that that they may be encouraging the hummingbirds to stay by feeding them. But bird migration, a lot of bird activity, especially migration, is triggered by the length of the day. So they don't. It's not really the food supply that starts the birds south. It's more the length of the day. As the days get shorter, they kind of know when it's time to go. So I wouldn't worry too much about keeping them behind. And then occasionally we hear reports of hummingbirds showing up very late, and sometimes even into the winter, and appearing at a feeder that's probably just has leftover nectar in it. And so those birds, they may well not survive, but it probably helps them if they do have a chance to survive that late when there's no flowers left, very little food for them. Then I think a feeder could be beneficial, but that's a rare set of circumstances when that happens. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I would say continue feeding until you really think that they are no longer around. And Becky's advice is good about not filling them up to the top, because they're not going to get emptied that much. But Catherine's description of having many hummingbirds around right now, that brings up the point that now is the time when bird populations are at their highest, because there are the adults plus the young birds around. And so, a lot of birds don't survive the southbound migration and also don't survive the northbound migration. So when they come back in the spring, the population is down again. So right now we're at the high point of bird populations, and probably that's what Catherine is experiencing. She's seeing the adults plus young birds from who knows, maybe 2 or 3 nests in her neighborhood are coming to her feeder since she's a regular feeder. And that's a great sight. And probably the reality is that not all those birds will be back next spring, but it's a treat to see them all right now.
Can I ask you a question about that? What do you think? I don't know if there's any data out there, if people track them. What about the chances that the same birds I'm seeing this year are going to come back here next year? Will they actually find their way that specifically back to a house, a piece of property, do you think?
Yes, the birds have amazing migratory accuracy. I don't know how much hummingbird banding has gone on, because obviously you can't add much weight to a hummingbird, slowing it down. But with other species, they found that birds come back to the very same bush where they were born sometimes. And, after traveling, perhaps 1,000 miles each way on a migratory trip, Kevin Berner, who does a lot of research with bluebirds and tree swallows, he very frequently finds the same tree swallows in a nest box 3 or 4 years running, and they probably go at least to Florida and back, migrating. And so they can really, they're very, very accurate. It's rather amazing that such a tiny creature can do that. Supposedly the first experiment in that regard was John Burroughs, the naturalist. He lived in Roxbury, and he had a phoebe that nested in his under his porch, as many people do. And he captured it one year, and he put a gold thread around its leg. And sure enough, the next spring, that bird with the gold thread came back and nested in the same nest. So yeah, they definitely can do it and do it.
For one, I have one thing to add regarding watching the hummingbirds at your feeders. I always look forward to the day that I see a couple of them, or even 3 of them, perched at the same time, tolerating each other. to me, those are siblings, those are youngsters, because the adults, we know how they all chase each other around.
Yeah, that's a good observation, Becky. Yeah. Yeah, you can learn an awful lot just by observing these birds. Their socialization, their activity in raising the young and getting them off on their own. It's quite a process, and they are well adapted to do it and quite successful. I mean, when you think about it, for a tiny bird like a hummingbird that has eggs about the size of a pea, to hatch something that tiny and then raise it to the point where it can fly to perhaps to Mexico, over the course of just 2 or 3 months is pretty stunning.
So can I ask a question then, in line of what Becky just said? I'm also doing work for the Breeding Bird Atlas, but I have never found a hummingbird nest. And this year, I really would be stretching it to say I was sure that those were juveniles or fledglings out there, because they really look a lot alike. So do you think that it would be good data gathering? Is it accurate to say that if they do that, I mean, every now and then you do see 3 or 4 that are there together, and they'll just be tolerant for a while. So can I say that I have fledglings and when I'm doing a checklist? Would you?
Well, personally, I would. Yes, I think that's especially I don't know where you're the block that you're in. If you're near the center of the block, or if you're right on the edge of a block, I might be a little less inclined to do that, because they could have flown over from another block. But if you're well into the block and you're seeing young hummingbirds late in the summer, I think you can be pretty confident that those are fledglings from your block. Yeah.
We also have a comment from Charlie, who recently read about a study that showed that however many hummingbirds you see at your feeders at one time, you can multiply that by 6 for the number of individuals visiting your feeders.
Wow.
Kind of like red squirrels.
Yeah, I can believe that. Well, number one, they're pretty difficult to count when you're getting up into multiple hummingbirds zipping in and out. Same with chickadees at your feeder. They make your head spin sometimes, and trying to count them accurately is very difficult. But yeah, I suspect that if most times they get undercounted. Anybody else have any questions or comments on hummingbirds? They definitely are fascinating creatures. They capture the imagination of people who are not birders. They're beautiful. They're pretty bold. You can get quite close to them. I've heard of hummingbirds flying in through a window and feeding on houseplant blossoms. So they nothing stops them, so to speak. I mean, there were always stories that hummingbirds tagged a ride on Canada geese as they were migrating south, that they crawled under the feathers of a Canada goose and hitched a ride south. But I think that's a wonderful thought, but I don't think there's any documentation of that. They kind of do it on their own.
Andy?
Yeah.
Lots of fledglings have shorter tails when they're first fledged. Is that true for hummingbirds, do you know?
I think so, yeah. I mean, hummingbird tails are actually relatively long for the size of the bird. So I would say, yeah, it's going to take a little while for them to get, to molt to that full tail length. So yeah, that's a good thought, Charlie, for IDing young birds. Yeah, yeah.
I think I've also read that the juveniles' beaks are shorter.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, they certainly are in other species. When you see a young, a young robin, the beaks look like little stubby beaks. They aren't fully developed for a while. And I suspect the same is true with hummingbirds. But they must be, long enough for them to feed. The length of that beak is important for them to get into flowers and into hummingbird feeders too, for that matter. So they're evidently, they have a long tongue. Sometimes you'll see a photograph of one at a feeder, and the tongue will be out, and it's quite a long, lengthy, skinny tongue that darts out to get the nectar or the sugar water. And hummingbirds are, a lot of people don't realize it, but actually when they're being raised by the parents, they're fed a lot of insects. They need protein as much as they need the energy from sugar, perhaps more so when they're growing. So adult hummingbirds do capture insects, small insects, take it back to the nest and feed the young birds. So they're adept at doing that when the time is necessary. Becky said she'd never seen Catherine said she'd never seen a hummingbird nest. Well, I've never either. I have had them pointed out to me. There was a woman, a friend of mine in Harpersfield, who had a knack for it. She just she was very patient, and she would just follow the birds, keep her eye on them, and it would take her days, but eventually she would locate the nest. And the nests were just little bumps on top of a branch, and they were covered with lichens, and they blended in perfectly. They just looked like a little knothole on the nest. It's something you would never ever notice just walking through the woods or looking around. I think the only way you could possibly do it is to keep track of the bird and follow it back to the nest.
My father, when I was a child, took us all out to see a hummingbird's nest, because when he mowed past the horse chestnut tree, he would see the bird in that area again and again. So we were lucky enough to be shown a hummingbird's nest when we were little.
Wow.
Yeah.
So we want to keep it to kind of a half an hour, so we're pretty much at that mark at this point. But if there's anybody that does have any final questions, please feel free to go ahead and unmute your mic and ask. And if not, then we will say our thank yous and adieus for this evening. We will be posting this on the website at doas.us/webinars or education webinars. So you'll find it in the list of past recordings of other programs that we've done since this past March there. I'm just looking to see Catherine or Jane.
No.
Good. Thank you very much, you guys. This is wonderful.
Yes, thanks very much.
And thanks for joining us, everybody. We appreciate it.
Always a pleasure.
That's for sure.
Very, very good. Then we'll go ahead and close us down for tonight. We'll put up the announcement for the next session. I'm not sure who the hosts will be for that one yet. But as soon as that's determined, we'll have the information on the website, and I'll send reminders out to anybody who's already registered for the series. You only have to register once, and you'll get an email reminder the day before just to let you know that it's happening again. So thank you again, everybody, and we wish you good night and have a great weekend and happy birding.